Are you or your business like a bump on a log? Close as I could get to wood and a log today. I don't have a fireplace where I'm at these days, so no logs to use for my like a bump on a log idiom. This idiom, very interesting idiom, Mark Twain used it in 1863 when he wrote, he's the author of Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, very famous author, many other famous works. And in 1863, he used the expression, the simile, a simile when we use like or as and compared to things. He used it to describe a person who was like a bump on a log, meaning they were immovable, they were inactive, they were not responsive, they were just like a bump on a log. Not much you can do with a bump on a log. It's just there, it's not moving, it's not going anywhere, it's not doing anything, it's not responding to anything. And there's so many ways that we can apply this to our businesses, right? Right now, especially during COVID-19 and the pandemic, some businesses are starting to open in my area, which is really exciting. Got my nails worked on yesterday and realized that they were definitely a casualty of COVID-19. But you know what? In 6 months, they'll be back and they'll be great and I will be happy and excited again. And they'll probably be better than they were before COVID-19 because I am on a mission to make sure everything in my life is better post-pandemic than it was before pandemic, and I'm bringing a whole bunch of people with me in that mission and in that vision. But what does being a bump on a log, what does that look like for you or your business? During COVID, maybe you're sitting dormant and you're just waiting for everything to reopen again. It's going to be June. I live on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota, and Wisconsin is opening things up. We had that Supreme Court decision, and Minnesota is still closed until June 1st. Well, it's just a couple of weeks now away. So some businesses are sneaking and opening. They're not being bumps on a log. They're not being inactive. But they're also putting themselves at risk of fines and penalties and all kinds of things because they're going before the mandate for their particular municipality or their state in this case. So it's kind of pandemic, and there's more change than ever going on because some things are open, some things aren't. There's different rules and regulations. So are you sitting and just waiting for the all clear to go back to the way things were before? That would be being a bump on a log, being non-responsive, being inactive, not being proactive in terms of doing what you can with what you've got right now. So we see that. We see a lot of that in business all the time, right? There is so much of one of my most dreaded statements from people when I work with corporations is, well, that's just the way we've always done it, which tells me they have a fixed mindset. It's how they've always done it. It's worked for them, and they're not even really open to anything else being possible. When we have a fixed mindset versus open mindset, that's an example of being a bump on a log. And there's a difference between being committed to a position that we ultimately believe in versus, well, that's just the way we've always done it. You're saying, well, that's the way we've always done it here, and you're not really saying whether you agree with it or not. You're just saying this is the way it's always been. Now, how many of us live in the past? Well, not very much if we want. We live in the present moment. So do we always want to do things now the way we've always done them? There aren't very many areas in my life, if I can think of any, that I want to do something the way I've always done it. I always want to be on a course of continuous improvement and finding better, faster, easier, more efficient, more effective ways of doing absolutely everything. Because guess what? There's infinite possibilities and infinite ways to do anything. And so I always tend to be open to what's possible. What else is possible is one of my favorite questions. So I dread that's the way we've always done it, but I love what else is possible. So our mindset is one area where we can be like a bump on a log. And if our leadership is like a bump on a log, guess what happens to our entire organization? Our entire organization, the speed of them is determined by the speed and the pace that we set in the organization. So if we have a fixed mindset and we're not open to other possibilities and other solutions and being creative and solving problems, which is the next area I want to talk about with being like a bump on a log. When we problem solve and make decisions, we can make them internally or we can make them externally, meaning we can be proactive or reactive. We can be deciding what direction we want to go with our business and our organization. Whether anybody tells us to or not, we need to be setting that direction. That's internally driven things. External problem solving and decision making, I don't know why I'm saying in instead of ing today, making based on external things and being reactive, just whatever happens, we react and respond to it. Our competition does something, then we react and respond. Our government says we need to shut down, we react and we respond. We wait for other people to stimulate us and before we take any action. That is what being like a bump on a log means to me as well. Long-term versus short-term decisions. If we make a lot of short-term decisions, especially during trying times and pandemic type times and chaotic times or challenging times, because we all had challenging times in our business. They might not be as big as a pandemic or as externally driven as the pandemic and the impact that that's had on our businesses and our lives, but we've all had littler versions of this that we've dealt with and we've succeeded our way through, and we'll succeed our way through this as well. And the third thing that comes to mind when I think about this is, I think, fixed versus flexible mindset. And that always reminds me of negotiations. In corporate America, throughout my career, and then in my own businesses, I've been involved in a lot of negotiations. I was in real estate for several years, and that all involved negotiations, right? And what I found is that when one or both parties came in with an absolute positive, deadpan, fixed mindset and a fixed position that they weren't going to bend on no matter what, and it always made the negotiations take longer, be more unproductive, be more miserable than when the parties come in with a, hey, I want to make sure that both parties win in this situation. And I've been involved in all different types of negotiations. But if one side comes in and they're like, absolutely positively, I'm not going to take anything but this, it happens in any kind of place where there's a disagreement, right? It happens in divorces, it happens in buying and selling anything, businesses, real estate, supplies, vendors, everything. It comes involved in all kinds of things that we negotiate. And I have found by lots of positive and negative experiences in negotiating that if I'm always looking for a position where everybody can win, number one, we find what we look for. If I'm looking for a position of win-win or win-win-win for everybody involved in the situation, we'll see those and they'll come up. If we're not looking for them, if I'm only looking for my position and the other side's only looking for theirs, usually we'll come to an agreement eventually, but both sides feel bad about it. And to me, that feels like a failure. But if all parties come out feeling like they've won and they come out feeling good about it, then I think that it's been a positive experience for everybody and that everybody wins in that negotiation. The other thing is, often we're put in a position where we act like a bump on a log for several reasons. We might procrastination, spinning our wheels, going around and around in circles, or being on that hamster wheel, not committing to something, making excuses or blaming or living in the past or believing something or objections. All of those are forms to me of fear in a given situation. And fear causes us to act like a bump on a log. If we're afraid of something, we're never going to act if we don't, drum up the courage, because courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is acting in spite of fear. And as leaders and business owners, it's up to us to be courageous and to continue to act, even though sometimes we'd rather just, tuck under the blankets and act like a bump on the log. And I love this expression. If you've got kids that play video games, nowadays all you have to do is look around and you see people locked on their phones and they can't do anything but look down at their phones. To me, that's behaving like a bump on a log. If you're so tied into your phone and social media that you can't even interact with other human beings, that's being a bump on a log. The ex watching sports was like a bump on the log. I mean, there was no interrupting, there was no moving as that focus and concentration was going on. So sometimes it's awesome when we act like a bump on a log and we're concentrated and focused and committed to getting something done, a task done, and we're moving toward that. But if you're moving toward something, you are active and you're not really a bump on a log. Love to know your experience with this expression. Guarantee I've used it. Guaranteed I've been accused of it as well throughout the years. But it is a good and very visual and easy to understand idiom, simile, expression. That's it. I will be with you tomorrow with another interesting idiom. What does it mean? Where does it come from? And how might you apply it to your business right now? Take care. Have an awesome day, and I will be with you tomorrow. Bye.